has taken a bit of a strange route, with new divides cropping up ever since the pandemic hit the world. I'm delighted to have joined with me someone who has an extensive wealth of knowledge about the subject of COVID and many other things. He's written books such as 365 Ways to Drive a Liberal Crazy and How to Be Right. And he's also a podcast host of a podcast known as The Delling Pod. So I am delighted to welcome to this interview James Delingpole. Thank you very much for taking your time out for me.
Oh, that's my pleasure. If I'm a bit kind of weird, I've got back pain and it's sort of slightly making me, it's like I'm slightly out of it. But
yeah, no problem.
I'll do my best.
I'll go easy on you with the questions, so it's all good.
Yeah.
So this interview really is just to reaffirm to not only myself but a lot of the viewers that we aren't crazy, because you have an extensive wealth of knowledge on a lot of these subjects. So there's a lot of talk about the Great Reset. Okay, that's one of the biggest topics at the minute. And there are still people out there that believe it's just some kind of conspiracy theory. Can I ask what your take is? Complete take.
It's not a conspiracy theory if they're out there telling you what they're doing, which the World Economic Forum has been doing for years on its websites. We're talking about an organization which was founded in the early 1970s. It's the organization where every year the 1% of the 1% fly off in their private jets to congregate at Davos and discuss how to reorder the world in their own interests. So the idea that you can magic away this problem by pretending that it's just a kind of a fantasy of people wearing tinfoil hats doesn't really work. I mean, they're perfectly open about it. It was the World Economic Forum which produced that video, I think in 2016, where some starry-eyed youth said, you'll learn nothing and you will be happy. Well, yeah. And apparently we're going to rent our properties and we're going to have everything we need delivered to us by, I don't know, probably some drone or something. And it's going to be great because who needs property anyway? I mean, why shouldn't we contract out all our possessions to a shadowy elite? What's not to like?
Exactly. And I find it very strange that there are still some people today that's still saying it's some sort of conspiracy theory when Klaus Schwab himself has even written a book called The Great Reset, and it speaks a lot about microchips in the brain and things like that, these radical ideas that is something out of some sort of dystopian novel. So it's quite scary.
What you're describing there is actually an integral part of the conspiracy. I mean, it's a shame really that this word conspiracy is now always associated with theory, and the reason for that, just going back, is that after the Kennedy assassination, the CIA started producing these briefing papers which they circulated, saying, anyone who doesn't believe the official narrative, let's call them a conspiracy theorist, and it's become this kind of stigma. But we know that the dictionary definition of a conspiracy is simply a couple of people or more gathering together to discuss how to order events. Conspiracies happen all the time. It's not a sort of fantastical thing which only crazy people believe in. But yeah, even part of the trick is that they announce what they're going to do. That they tell you in plain sight. They have websites, they have meetings, and so on. So it's all out in the open. And yet at the same time, you have these people, I suppose you'd call them useful idiots. That's what Lenin or Stalin would have called them. People who are prepared for whatever reason to go out there and deny the thing that they're telling us about is real. Now, how can you do that when they've got all these websites and papers and briefing documents and meetings telling you exactly what they're going to do? How can you have that and yet simultaneously claim that this is not real? It's a form of cognitive dissonance. It's a form of sort of deliberate misinformation. It's designed to muddy the waters. These people aren't stupid. These people, after all, they're the ones that call the shots in the world, and they've been doing it for decades. So they've mastered every kind of psychological manipulation technique in the book. I mean, it's no coincidence that right now Britain is being run by behavioral scientists. They've got this down to a fine art. I mean, the SAGE committees, they're not mostly infectious disease experts. They're experts on behavioral manipulation. And that's what organizations like the WEF do as well.
Sure. And do you not think it's strange that they had a global youth leadership scheme, the WEF, and it's a strange coincidence that Boris Johnson, Macron, Justin Trudeau, and I believe Jacinda were part of this before they all came to power. I mean, is that just some coincidence?
Oh, not just Jacinda Ardern, but also Kurz, the Austrian leader. Pretty much. It's interesting. I would say pretty much all the leaders in the world today. I mean, obviously not President Xi. I don't think he was a WEF youth leader. He may have been. Is essentially a kind of meat puppet. They've been selected for their pliability, corruptibility, and incompetence. I mean, I don't know how much Jacinda Ardern has made since she turned, on WHO orders, turned New Zealand into a kind of fascist state.
Sure. But
she's made like a bandit. I mean, so these people are morally corrupt. They are probably blackmailable. And yeah, they've all been on the WEF Young Leaders course. They've been groomed. Yeah, is what's happened to them. They've been groomed for the positions they occupy now. Most people still imagine that we live in a democratic system where your vote makes a difference, and there's a red party and a blue party, and if you want right-wing policies, you go blue, and if you want left-wing policies, you go red, unless it's America where they've got the colors the wrong way around. But actually, it is not like that. It is not like that. What you've really got is these supranational bodies like the World Economic Forum. And that's only one example. And you've got the Trilateral Commission, founded about the same time, by the way, in 1971, I think. You've got the Committee of 300. You've got Bilderberg. You've got the Club of Rome. These are all shadowy bodies comprised of very, very, very rich industrialists, central bankers, the people who really, really control the world. And every year they issue their edicts to their meat puppets in government, and the meat puppets obey their orders, which is all they're good for. And we, of course, get shafted. Yeah,
it's a pretty crap deal on our part, really, because we're always like you said.
But it is a crap deal, but it always has been a crap deal. It's the world is quoting there's a good documentary on Kennedy. It's a rich man's trick. Sure. We are being duped, although increasingly we're not being duped. I think a few years ago I started hearing this phrase bandied about the Great Awakening.
Yes.
I didn't know what it was. I just thought, is it some kind of hippie consciousness raising thing or what? Now that I have awoken, I realize what it is. And there's lots of people like me. I mean, I know some people that say, yeah, I was down the rabbit hole from 9/11, or I've been down the rabbit hole since Kennedy. And I salute their perspicacity, those people who've been there that long time. But there's quite a lot of people like me who in the last 2 years have been radicalized by events and have come to realize the truth about the world. And this is our best hope, because it's up to us, the people. We're not going to get it from our political leaders, because, as we've established, they are just stooges.
James, who do you think runs our country?
Nobody whose name you know.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I have a feeling I want to sort of explore this idea of who actually runs our country, right? And I think there's something to do with maybe the civil servants and the unions, possibly. They seem to be calling the shots a lot.
Definitely they play their part. So, okay, you could say that the deep state runs the country. So yeah, the civil service, the chief secretary of the cabinet office probably has much more power than the prime minister. The people who have these jobs, yeah, they're the ones who, I suppose, certainly conduct the day-to-day operations and the kind of short to medium term planning. I think the bigger strategic decisions are made at a level above the civil service, above our own country, at things like the Committee of 300 and the Trilateral Commission and so on. Of which Keir Starmer is a member, for example. I'm sure Keir Starmer gets his marching orders from the Trilateral Commission, and then you've got the central bankers. I think, look, it's an endlessly there's an endless series of tunnels when you start asking the question, who is it who really rules the world? And different people have different obsessions. And although I think it's sort of interesting obviously these questions are interesting because power games are always interesting.
Sure.
But actually, I think it's kind of fruitless because almost by definition, you won't know who these people are. They arrange it that way, and they have done for centuries, if not millennia. But you know what their motivations are.
Oh yeah.
You know, for example, that they despise us as useless eaters. We are no more important to them than slaves were to Babylonians. That's the deal. Always has been. We know that they are a lot of them are. They worship the devil. I mean, literally, in many cases, they worship Lucifer. They are obsessed with gematria, with numerology. They're obsessed with a calendar. They're obsessed with things like they follow the vampire law, which is, how in order for a vampire to come into your house, you first have to invite it across your threshold.
Sure.
Otherwise the vampire can't get in. In the same way, they have this weird karmic obsession with telling us what they're going to do, normally in the form of movies or pop videos and things like that. They use our culture to tell us what they have planned for us. So science fiction movies, for example, tell us roughly where things are going, or Madonna pop videos might tell us, the direction of travel. And then they feel that somehow, by their perverse moral code, they feel that they are absolved of any karmic comeback for the terrible things they're planning for us, because they've told us and we've kind of accepted it, so we kind of deserve it.
It's quite scary, isn't it? And especially when you look into things like the World Economic Forum, that these people such as Klaus Schwab and even Bill Gates as well are obsessed with things like eugenics, which is quite a scary thing to have.
Well, it is. It is. It's certainly scary when you think that guy who wears these sort of cuddly looking sweaters and just seems like a kind of geek who could do nobody any harm, when it turns out that he's in charge. He's in charge of the global vaccine program and is in bed with Bill Gates, with Big Pharma, and with crooks like Anthony Fauci.
Sure.
And I mean, it's a criminal cartel that is currently running global health policy. Definitely. Yeah. And you're right. There is the creepy element of transhumanism, which the billionaire elite seem to identify with, as they have done, of course, since at least the 1930s. I mean, that's what Brave New World was about. Aldous Huxley was a witness to the birth of the technocratic movement, and he knew what their plans were. And Brave New World was the kind of the predictive text.
It's just a bit. Sometimes it gets a bit much, doesn't it? When you go through all of this, you find out a few bits, right, about, let's say, the WEF for a good example, and then you look into it a bit more, and it's so open to everyone to look at. Like we said earlier about it just being on their website, you can easily access it. You can easily do a bit of digging, and then you stumble across all this stuff. I mean, I stumbled across recently a government document that was published back in May 2021, and it was about what was it about? It was about human mixing in
augmentation.
With augmentation. That's it, human augmentation.
Yeah.
And I read that, and I was petrified after. And their biggest asset, the biggest thing that they need, is personal data, and it sort of fits in with their obsession with personal data at the minute, with the NHS pass and lots of different aspects. And you sort of think, well, when's this going to end? How do we get rid of this? It's quite scary.
It ends. I'll tell you how it ends. It ends when we say it does.
It's true.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And if we don't say it, then it will go on. It will go on. This is the ultimate test. And we were all born for this moment, and we all chose this moment. And some people so far are not rising to the occasion. But I don't know. I fancy our chances. And one reason I fancy our chances are that they are so few. We're probably talking about 6,000 people at the heart of this conspiracy to turn us all into cattle. And there's a lot more of us, I mean, how many billion? 7 billion?
Yeah.
Or more. And although at the moment not everyone's woken up, where more and more people are waking up.
Yeah. Does that scare you a bit, that a lot of people still can't see reason to this?
Not scare me. I think one shouldn't be scared.
Mm-hmm.
Really, I mean, it's interesting. You've used the word scary lots and lots of time.
Yeah.
But actually, if you look in the Bible, if you read the Bible, what you find is the most common injunction is do not be afraid.
Sure.
And there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is that fear is a base emotion which renders us more easy to exploit. And it's a fruitless emotion. I mean, terrible things may be coming, but you've just got to face up to them and deal with them. And if necessary, die like a Viking. That has to be the deal. Fear is, I mean, I know it's easy to say, but it doesn't help anyone. It really doesn't. Oh, and the other thing, of course, is that God is on our side. He's not on the side of the satanic. I hate using the word elite because it makes them sound like they're special, and they're not. I mean, they're just low level scumbags who happen to have lots and lots of money and power.
Yeah, and
a tremendous sense of entitlement.
I wanted to ask about PCR testing. Now, I think. Well, I'm going to ask you, do you think that the legacy media will admit that the PCR tests now just pick up the common cold? Well, they've always have done, I believe. But do you think that they'll start reporting on this as more and more is coming out? I mean, we've got a shortage apparently now, and what's your take?
Do you ever, are you a fan of, I'm a massive fan of Cliff High. Have you ever come across Cliff High?
No, I've not personally, no.
He's got quite a dedicated fan club. Cliff High is a sort of computer geek, among other things, and he uses he sort of conducts massive data searches on the internet, and uses keywords to establish future trends. And anyway, one of the things that Cliff has been saying for quite some time is that we are approaching a watershed moment in which the mainstream media, the legacy media, will have to admit to things that previously it would not admit. Not because it's going to be suddenly hit by a flush of honesty and or anything, but because public understanding will reach such a stage that if the media doesn't admit what's going on, then it will look even more irrelevant than it does anyway, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So it will be an attempt to claw back a degree of relevance for itself. So it will have to report on, even though to people like you and me, we've known since the beginning virtually that PCR tests don't work. We're all familiar with Kerry Mullis, the guy who invented the PCR test and who died mysteriously not so long ago. Kerry Mullis said that that PCR tests are always inappropriate for testing asymptomatic people because they pick up all sorts of things. They particularly if they run at a high number of cycles, which these PCR tests have been routinely, the number of false positives they generate renders the whole use of the PCR test meaningless. So I think you're right. I think that there will come a point quite soon where the media will have to admit that this is so. I mean, I think some countries have already abandoned the PCR test, haven't they? Hasn't the Biden administration announced that they're not going to use them anymore?
Yeah, I think I did see something like that. I know places like Japan are 12 steps ahead with this type of stuff.
Yeah, they are.
Ahead with this type of stuff.
Yeah, they are.
I've been doing a bit.
It's a shame, isn't it? We can't go to Japan.
Yeah, I know. What a bummer, eh?
It's a bummer, but they've got a sort of they're very big on their kind of national identity, aren't they? They don't chip in too many. So I'm just putting my
that's all right, no problem. No worries. Well, in this current state that we're in as a society in Britain, where do you see the country going in this current climate?
Well, that's really interesting. I don't do predictions because I don't know. I just don't think they work really, because it's really interesting what's happened in the last couple of months. I think that the plan of Boris, the Johnson administration, was to implement another round of lockdowns.
Yeah. But they sensed from the public that they weren't going to get away with it. There were various factors in play. This is where I think we win. So, for example, it became clear that lots of people were saying, I had such a bad time after the first two jabs. There's no way I'm going to get a booster, particularly given that I was told that if I had the first two jabs, I would be free to travel, to do this or that. And now it turns out that that's not enough. Sure. And
people, it's interesting the things that radicalize people. I mean, for me, the things that radicalize me are completely different from the ones that have radicalized some of the normie types I talk to. So, for example, there was a chap came around the other day to fix my phone, and he'd had the first two jabs, and he said the reason he wasn't going to get the third was because he'd seen footage of politicians and so on having their private parties and without masks and stuff, and which showed that they didn't take this stuff as seriously as they pretend to take it in press conferences. Now, I for me, this would have been a kind of like what you didn't realize. You really needed to see politicians being hypocrites before you. But one forgets that not everyone is an obsessive trawler of the internet, of obscure sites on the internet, which is the only way you're going to find this information. Most people still get their information from the BBC and stuff, so they're very much affected. They're very much affected by the agenda of the mainstream media, which brings us back to that point about if as we suggested earlier, the mainstream media is going to start reporting on things like the inadequacy of the PCR tests, although it may seem to us too little too late, actually it's a step in the right direction.
Sure.
So anyway, you asked me about what's going to happen. So I think they were planning another lockdown. In fact, they probably wanted to lock us down over Christmas and certainly over New Year. And they may still have one up their sleeve. I mean, you wouldn't put anything past them. But I think they've been stymied, one, by people's reluctance to get the booster shots. That's kind of derailed their plans slightly. And another is the large number of people who have been saying, if we have another lockdown, I'm not going to sodding do it. I've had enough of this. It's really stupid.
Yeah.
So they've won certain victories, certain undeserved victories, like, for example, the way they've managed to force children the teachers' unions have effectively forced children to wear masks at schools.
Yeah.
So that we can chalk that up as a loss. But against that, we've got just a growing sense of, I think, rebelliousness, which can only tend towards the good.
Yeah, I am completely in agreement. I believe that they're getting a bit desperate now. I mean, they were desperate from the start, in my opinion, but they're really trying to claw back at this. I still think that there is going to be some form of lockdown, whether it's masked over with things like the term circuit breaker and stuff like that, which they tried to do.
Yes.
I still think that they're going to give that a go, at least once this year.
Yes, definitely.
And I think, even though the call for the booster shot has been quite stagnant, I do think they're gonna try and panic people into try and get it, because they've been using that tactic. They're not gonna give up that tactic of using fear and panic. So I believe they're going to keep ramping up that fear with that. And I believe that they're going to try and get onto. I mean, they've already had little talks about possibly the fourth shot. So
no, there's going to be at least, I think, six shots, possibly 8 shots. They've already paid for them. That's the thing. Well, you only have to look at Israel, which is the bellwether for all this. I mean, they're already on the 4th or 5th shots.
Yeah.
That's a given. But again, this goes back to the vampire thing.
Sure.
That they will do what they can get away with. So if they sense that the public is not going to resist a particular measure, they will carry on. I mean, it's a bit like Lenin's dictum about bayonets. You know, push with the bayonet. If you feel mush, carry on pushing.
Yeah.
And that's how it works. But if they see signs of resistance, they will find other ways of trying to advance their agenda, more subtle ones.
Yeah,
because they're quite good at that in this country. I think they've probably looked at Australia and thought those heavy-handed tactics won't wash in the UK.
Yeah,
so they're going to be more subtle about it.
I think they're terrified of some sort of revolt. I think they're absolutely terrified of it. I think Australia, it's an interesting one with Australia, with the news breaking, of course, of the tennis player Novak, who's gone over with a vaccine exemption, and then they was denied by the authorities because a lot of backlash was happening as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's a way of them flexing their muscles to show, look, we're tough on COVID. We know that this is the correct move, but really they're actually cowards. They're terrified of the people going, hang on a minute, like, why is he allowed to do it and I'm not, and X, Y, and Z, and it would start a revolt.
I'm sure they thought about this. I'm sure there was a lot of debating at high levels about whether they should let Novaks get away with it or not. And because in a way, it's the Streisand effect, isn't it? Mm-hmm. By forbidding him entry, what they're doing is showing that an international sporting hero doesn't want to get the jab, and then you start asking questions like, why doesn't he want to get the jab? You know, hang on a second, he's why would he put his not getting the jab before winning the Australian Open again? He's a tennis player. You'd think that would matter to him more. So I think they may have shot themselves in the foot there. I don't know.